So I'm Daniel Gooch, and I'm presenting work we've done on scaffolding citizen innovation in the context of smart cities. And I'm presenting on behalf of colleagues at the OU, some of whom I think are in the audience, but I can't see, and our charity partners, Community Action Milton Keynes. So as a bit of context around what smart cities are, they're a response to an increasing urbanized population. So the UN estimates that around 65 of us are going to be living in an urban area within the next 40 years or so. And that places a huge strain on existing city infrastructure, both physical in terms of transport and energy and water infrastructure, but also in terms of social, democratic, economic, community infrastructure as well. And smart cities, the theory goes, takes technology and data, bundles this into the running of these services, and things get better. Such programs of work introduce new challenges for participatory design, particularly around scale, because we're now operating in the context of cities, which we have some experience in, but on a participatory side, less so. The work that has been done around this can generally be broken down into three different streams of work. So there's the open data idea, where the city releases data to people, and hopefully they do something useful or interesting with it. There's the citizen as data collector scheme of work, which is more akin to citizen science, where people report data to the council or city governance, who then process it and do something interesting with it, hopefully. And then there's smaller programs of work, which we've classified as citizen as collaborator. And we're talking here around things like short-term hackathons, where people are brought together to solve some short-term guided concern. And while there's huge benefits to work under each of these three streams, they have limitations either in terms of the scale of participation, particularly with hackathons, or the level of empowerment in terms of the action and change that the individual citizen can actually achieve. So our question was looking at whether it was possible to design a scheme for participatory design that would operate at this urban scale. This work takes place in the context of a broader smart city project based in a city in the UK called Milton Keynes, which is about an hour north of London, which is probably more well known. Population is around 230,000, scheduled to grow to around 300,000 in the next 8 years, with plans to grow to around 500,000 in the near future. The consortium of the broader project was made up of universities, businesses, third sector organisations, and the City Council. And my team was running the Citizen Innovation Programme with a brief that we had to operate across the entire city. The scheme had to be citizen-led, solving local community problems, using some form of technology or data to address that community concern. So we developed a community innovation process which relies on a rich history of community innovation from a variety of fields, but has been repurposed for the context of the smart city. So it goes through a relatively standard process of engaging the community, then extracting ideas for change, turning those ideas into reality on the ground, and then for those projects which remain successful, somehow sustaining the success, either growing it across other communities or continuing it in the long term. So in terms of community engagement, our charity partners employ a team of what they term community mobilizers, who spend their working life embedded within these communities, scaffolding community concerns, working with local organizations to either fundraise, recruit volunteers, and just talking to people. Through that, they note down every conversation they have with anyone through an app, giving us a massive set of very rich data on the sentiment that various communities are responding to. Building on that, we then had a dual system of generating ideas. We had a variety of face-to-face activities, focus groups that we convened, and we also launched an online platform which anyone could access and post ideas for change onto. But recognizing that the ideas on their own don't actually change anything, we also convened a funding competition where there were 4 rounds of funding released over a period of around 15 months, and applicants sent in a short competition form which consisted of what the idea was, what they wanted the small amount of money for, what the smart city aspect of their proposal was, and what would actually happen as a result of the thing they wanted to do. We received around 30 applications, of which we funded 13, and I'll talk very briefly about some of them shortly. In terms of the sustaining success, this is where we are now, so I'm not going to be talking about that today any further. So as promised, here are the 13 projects we funded. They cover a huge range of different aspects, from trying to get people healthier by getting them out onto the cycle paths, through to promoting breastfeeding, off-grid water supplies for an allotment site, and just a huge range of diverse concepts. I haven't got time to go through all of them, so I just wanted to focus briefly on this one, which was a project run by a visually impaired campaigner, a lady called Padma Sharon, who's 78 and quite frankly has more energy than I do. It's just tiring being around her. But her concern was that while she can get from her house to the local shopping centre, which is indoors in Milton Keynes, as soon as she entered that building, she could no longer find her own way around. She had to rely on assistance either provided by someone she took with her or someone that the shopping centre had to provide. So her concept was to install Bluetooth beacons outside each of the shop, develop an app, and then she could just navigate around internally. She's been successful in lobbying for a scheme such as this to be part of the shopping centre's digital strategy. Although when we actually trialled the solution she wanted to deploy, it turned out that the beacons and the security systems in the shop were on a similar frequency, and we set them all off, which didn't make us particularly popular that day. So it's not going to be that scheme, but it's going to be something similar. I wanted to pull this one out in particular because it highlights that some of these concerns respond to a relatively small population, but for that population, they are intensely important and perhaps wouldn't be something that would come up in a more top-down, technocentric perspective on smart cities. So from across the various stages of the initiatives, we have a large amount of information. We've got over 4,500 dialogues collected through the Community Mobilisers app. We had 100 ideas posted on the website and a similar number through the face-to-face events. We have the 30 competition forms plus the experience of the 13 projects we funded. And then the question is, well, what do we do with this stuff that we've collected? And what we've ended up with is a 2-stage analysis where the first step we're looking at what this information can tell us about the process we've designed and whether it's been effective enough. And then the second step, we take a more reflective approach by looking back and saying what were the challenges we experienced that other people may find interesting or important to work on in the future. So looking at the first level, the were we successful kind of analysis, and it turns out we were pretty good. So we were very successful at engaging middle-aged people from the lower socioeconomic areas of the city. And this was important to us because while demographic data is relatively difficult to find for various initiatives within this smart city world, that data we did find indicated that participation tends to come from younger, more affluent, more technically skilled people, the sort of easy wins, if you like. So hitting this middle-aged, lower socioeconomic population was an indication that you can engage different sectors of the community if that's targeted. One of the interesting contrasts we found was that the dialogue data tends to be extremely localized, either operating at a community or street level, whereas the ideas and projects actually operated at a city scale. There wasn't that same concern for just finding solutions that worked on my street. They were looking for solutions that would affect the city as a whole. And to sum up everything, What people were proposing were essentially practical solutions to local concerns that could be implemented today. And again, this stands in quite marked contrast to some of the hyperbole that comes around with this smart city agenda. Whereas instead of wanting to be able to make every car travel through the city 3 times quicker, what people actually wanted was a bus stop they could walk to. So there's quite a marked contrast there in the scope of ambition. Stepping back from that and looking at the challenges and opportunities we faced, there's a lot of them, and I'll start off by saying we have no answers to any of these. But they're interesting to consider, particularly when you're looking at designing similar approaches and initiatives to ours. So one of the first things we wanted to do was look at what was actually preventing people from running these projects on their own. What was it that we were bringing to the mix that was having the essential component in getting these projects working? Unsurprisingly, one of them was simply cost. So we were providing funding, relatively small grants. We're talking around 2 to 3 grand per 2 to 3 sterling, which is around $4,000 I think. So relatively small costs, but significantly high for these community groups. They were also not that technically skilled in a lot of cases and relied on us on either scaffolding the process for finding volunteers to support them with that, or in finding ways of actually skilling them up. And then the last element was collaboration. So in a lot of cases, both the projects and ideas proposed needed engagement from another stakeholder, be that the city council or a local organisation, be that a company or a third sector body. For a citizen to have access into that is quite often incredibly challenging. They just don't have the presence to be able to walk in and say, I want to do this. Being part of this broader MK Smart project opened doors that wouldn't otherwise be available because it gave a huge presence to what was going on and a bulk of respectability that perhaps wouldn't otherwise have been there. One of the things we were quite careful about when we were setting up the process was balancing trying to reach everybody, particularly through the online platform, against still retaining personal contact with the individuals we wanted to work with. That blended approach worked to a certain extent, although we found that the narrative through the online system was incredibly convoluted because you have the narrative around here's MK Smart, and within that there's the Citizen Innovation Scheme, and within that there's then 2 different organisations working on different things, and then within that there's the dialogues and the projects and the idea, and it's confusing for us. So expecting anyone else to be able to visit the website and just understand it was a big ask, whereas through a personal contact you have that dialogue and the conversation evolves over time, and it's much, much smoother. So we slightly developed our process where we would use the online platform to shepherd people into the face-to-face events where we could then have those conversations. Control of the process is a very interesting element that's discussed at length in the paper. But what this speaks to is the nature of empowerment the citizen receives. We were very keen for this to be a citizen-led process, and to a certain extent it is. All of the projects were run by citizens, and we were scaffolding the support that they received. But ultimately, we still retained control because we decided what was funded and what wasn't. And that balancing act is very challenging. There are obvious ways to adjust for that, for example, crowdsourcing or crowd voting for which projects are most popular, but then you run the risk of actually not accessing those marginalised voices which don't have mass appeal. So thinking back to Padma and her visual impairment, there's no guarantee that that would hit the vibe that would ensure its success. As the image suggests, our city council isn't universally beloved by the people who live in Milton Keynes, and similar concerns to those that were expressed in the first presentation. Working with local authorities is challenging because they're risk averse, They have things they have to achieve through legal obligations, and they're currently operating in financially austere times. So actually trying to get them to embed any of this work in their ongoing processes is particularly challenging, which is something to consider. So to summarize, we've provided empirical insights into the benefits of engaging with citizens in the context of smart cities. And thank you very much. I am happy to take questions, although I am also aware that there's coffee outside, so we can also have a conversation offline as well. Thank you very much.
Sorry, get to coffee in a minute. Hi, I'm Jules Maitland. I do a lot of work in community cooperatives, and so this kind of citizen engagement is really important to us. I'm not sure if I missed it, but what was done with the data from the dialogues? Was that then formulated into project proposals, or was the online? Yeah.
So no, it wasn't.
Okay.
So the dialogue data was primarily used to construct the areas of interest that were being proposed through the website. So within the website and the project proposals, there were 5 key areas that we were looking to respond to, which were health, the environment, and similar type initiatives. So that's where that link came across. One of the things we wanted to do with the dialogues, which we never quite got to, was actually constructing a live map where you would have areas of the city and could extract the sentiment of them directly, with hope that that would be of use to both the community organisations themselves and to the council, but we didn't quite get to that step yet.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you for a nice presentation. My name's Jenny Priest. I'm from the University of Maryland. Actually used to be at the Open University, was at Milton Keynes last week. So my question is about, you mentioned environment, and I guess it's really a little push towards asking how much you're considering in your smart cities work, green spaces. Milton Keynes is pretty amazing in that it has a lot of wildlife, a surprising amount. And most smart cities are, of course, focused on our species. They're humans. But I think for our environment to be good for the future, for children and grandchildren, we need to be thinking more about the human species in relationship to other species. So my question is, are you taking that perspective into account?
So in terms of the proposals we got, none addressed those kinds of concerns. So the simple answer is no, but we hadn't constrained down so that that wasn't a possibility. It simply was that we weren't getting that kind of proposal from citizens, if you like.
I'm going to make sure you do. There's an amazing guy who runs the park service there. His name's Martin. I'm going to encourage him to put a proposal in.
Yes, Eric Corbett, Georgia Tech. I just had a question about the dialogues. You said there was an app that you used. Was it just like recording the audio, or how did that actually work, and like who was using it?
It was a custom app that the community mobilizers already used, and it was textual data. So it was short sentences that they typed out, summarizing the conversations they'd had, matched with various key information markers that they then employed, such as the neighbourhood they were working in, the rough gender age of the person they were talking to, that we then just extracted out.
Was it like a custom thing, or was it like?
It was custom.
Uh-huh.
Hi, Dana Habib from Indiana University. Could you talk a little bit more about the Bluetooth beacons indoors that you're talking about in your talk, and also whether you thought about implementing that design outside in the outdoor urban environment?
Sure. So I haven't got the exact technical data because that was being handled by other organizations that were being brought in to propose solutions to the identified problem. it was the case that Padma wanted to use the shopping centre as a case study that would then allow other organisations to take up similar initiatives within themselves, particularly in places such as the local hospital, which are renowned for being impossible to navigate in, even if you can see. In terms of outdoor, that hadn't really occurred to us, so that's an interesting thing for us to think about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You've been a wonderful audience, and thank you so much to the presenters, because they didn't even need me. I feel so, so useless up here. But nonetheless, they were really awesome in their timing and everything, and their presentations were great. Thank